I want to tell you a story about three friends, Mr. Turtle, Mr. Rabbit, and Mr. Buzzard. They were very poor gentlemen, just barely scraping by. And one day, Mr. Turtle and Mr. Buzzard discovered a business opportunity where they thought they could make a lot of money. But they didn't want to include Mr. Rabbit. They wanted to cut Rabbit out. So they got together with Rabbit and told him, they said, "Rabbit, for every pound of shit that you can bring us, we'll pay you $1 a pound." And Mr. Rabbit jumped at that chance. He said, "Oh my." So off he went. He left to go round up his shit. So sure enough, Mr. Turtle and Mr. Buzzard's business deal came through nicely, and they made a bunch of money. And about 6 or 8 months later, Rabbit was long gone. They didn't think they would see him again. And here he comes back in town. He's driving a big truck, and behind him is lined up as far as you could see, truck after truck, all filled with shit. He went down that dirt road down to the little shack where Turtle and Rabbit and Buzzard lived, and he went up to the door and knocked on the door. This little old lady came to the door and said, "Can I help you?" And Mr. Rabbit said, "I'm looking for Mr. Turtle and Mr. Buzzard." And she said, "Oh my, those fine gentlemen have made it big now. They've moved out of this shack. They live up there on top of the hill in that big mansion now." Rabbit looked around up there. He saw the mansion. He said, "Okay, thank you very much." So he gathered up all this shit, his trucks, and they turned around and off they went up this long, nice driveway with nice lights and iron gate and all this. And they pulled up to this mansion. And Mr. Rabbit goes up to the door, a big door, and he knocks on the knocker. And he heard someone approaching the door, and it slowly opened, and there's a butler all dressed in a tuxedo. He said, "Yes, may I help you?" And Mr. Rabbit said, "I'm here to see Mr. Turtle." And the butler said, "Mr. Turtle is down by the well." And Mr. Rabbit said, "Oh." He said, "Well, what about Mr. Buzzard? Is he around?" And the butler said, "Mr. Buzzard is out in the yard." So Mr. Rabbit told him, he says, "Well, would you go tell him that Mr. Rabbit is here with his shit?"